bottomed out or something. All right. Okay, we are live this morning, and it is November 22nd. And today, Josh, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, we're going to be talking about how the Canadian job market is worse than you think. So if you're just looking at the headline unemployment number, I don't think it's telling people the full story. And so, everyone, welcome back to the Beat the Odds of Business Wealth podcast here. And, we'll break down the job numbers and kind of maybe tell a bit of the bad news and, what you'd expect. How do you position yourself to make sure that you and your family can benefit, from the circumstances that might not be ideal. So let's do that.
Yeah, it's about being realistic. The data that you're going to show is going to be pretty telling as to, the rosy picture that the government of Canada is painting is a little bit different than what is in reality. So
Yeah.
let's get after it.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, Trevor, and let's go. Let's dive into it. Okay. So we're looking at the month by month employment numbers that we post here on our Instagram channel. And when you look at October 2024, you see a headline unemployment rate of 6.5%, which in itself, anything over 6%, you start to meet the definition of unemployment. And we crossed that threshold, earlier this year. And when you look at the full-time jobs, it grew the full-time jobs, 16,900,000 jobs, median hourly wage, kind of locked in at $30 an hour here. And so, when you look at that, it does not look great, but it does not look that bad. 100,000 extra full-time jobs. But when you start to drill in more specifically to the numbers, you're going to start to see, what's going on a little bit more here. So the next tab here, we get the unemployment rate here again, but this time, we're putting it alongside of public sector and private sector jobs in millions. Okay, it's one of my pet peeves of the reporting system is the full-time jobs. I love full-time job number. Like to me, I think it's a number that's it's harder. It's less subjective, right?
Yeah, it's
But
not subject to seasonality and these types of metrics. I think full-time jobs report is much more telling of where we really are at.
yeah, but anyone who wants to dive into the stats kind of the website, you'll see how obscured full-time public versus full-time private jobs are. You can see full-time jobs and part-time jobs, and you can see public jobs and you can see private jobs, but you'll see the buried or not available at all on a month-to-month basis, sometimes on full-time public or full-time private. So what we're presenting here is total. Okay, so total public sector jobs of 4.4 million and private sector jobs of 13.5 million. But you can see that although we've actually added 200,000 public sector jobs in 2 months. 200,000 public sector jobs in 2 months. Meanwhile, we lost 300,000 private sector jobs. Now, these are, when you go from summer to fall, there's a natural, transition. Sometimes public sector jobs do come back, but these are supposed to be the seasonally adjusted numbers that we're looking at here. They're supposed to be the seasonally adjusted numbers. I've always, questioned the methodology and just recognize that that's a difficult assignment. Okay. But when you're seeing 6.5% and it's like, okay, we didn't blow past 6.5%. It seems to be holding strong and we seem to be adding some full-time jobs. It's like, well, we're bleeding private sector jobs and we're adding public sector jobs. And the data is pretty clear on this, right? And
Yeah, so like maybe let people know why that matters so much, why we're, the reason, not the reason why we're doing it, but what impact that actually has on our overall economy when you're losing the private sector jobs for public sector workers.
people often talk about like GDP per capita in Canada, and productivity. I always say productivity matters, and really, like if you want to increase the quality of life in any country, you have to increase the productivity. Ultimately, that's the main metric that that drives it. But people working for the government, it's like generally not increasing the productivity of the country. Think of the simple example is the power bar, and the power bar is plugged into itself. You know what I mean? Like there's nothing really happening there. It's like, and this trend is very, very alarming, right? Because we posted the historical trend before, and I'll put it up on the screen here. And this is the growth in thousands, since 2019, right? And you can see that the private sector, you can see that the public sector jobs just, kind of took off here after 2019. And we're adding, say, 600,000 public sector jobs in the last 5 years, rough numbers, this is the trajectory, versus 900,000 private sector jobs. So in other words, there's only 1.5 private sector jobs being created versus every person running from the government. It's just like, think of a business. It's like every manager, you have one manager for every 1.5 people that are actually doing the work, right? Think of the guys, standing around and standing around and digging the hole. It's like you got 2 supervisors and 3 guys digging the hole. Like it's like, or administrators in the office, 2 secretaries, and only 3 people out in the field. Like it's like that ratio just does not work. It just does not support productivity, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely insane as to where we're going. Like you look at the numbers, and really 30% of the workforce out there works for the government. That's insane.
Yeah, it's it's like, and even that would be a 3-to-1 ratio, but we're not even close to that anymore,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
the growth on that is, it should be more of a kind of a 10-to-1 ratio. Like that would be a kind of more of a tenable situation, because some people that they counter to that is like, well, do you want, how do you want to get your passport? How do you want to get? It's like, you don't need that many people. You're missing the point. It's not that we're saying, hey, no one should work for the government. It's like the number of people should work for the government. If we were diagnosing any business and you had this many people in your administrative department and you had that many people in the revenue generating departments, it's like that business just won't be profitable. In this case, as a country, won't be productive. So that is one of the major challenges. And you go to this long-term trend that we're basically only creating 1.5 private jobs for every 1 public job. We're also bleeding small businesses, and that probably is the stem. It's 53% of the jobs historically in this country created by small businesses, but we have almost 200,000 small businesses less than we did 5 years ago, and despite a massive, massive population growth. And I would suggest that this number, I dug into this number and looked at various sources here, that this number is actually understated, because what's happened since 2019 is, we've had kind of the growth of ride sharing and delivery services. And I would say there's probably at least 200,000 people in Canada that are doing ride sharing or delivery services. And so you see this number where we have 200,000 less small businesses. But if you were to deduct out the Uber drivers and the skip to this drivers, like we might be 400,000 small businesses less. And not that there's anything wrong with doing those jobs. It's just that the likelihood that you're going to become an Uber driver and start hiring people is virtually zero, right? Those aren't the businesses that create jobs. Those are the side hustles where you're basically just an employee of Uber or Skip the Dishes, but you'll show up on these reports as self-employed, even though that self-employment has no prospect of ever creating a job for another Canadian, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the situation that you hear. So it's going to be really important moving forward to assess that unemployment number, not just with the full-time jobs, but with the public and private jobs, because a lot can be hidden in that. And in reality, that's actually hasn't been that different in the US too, if you look at the recent job reports too.
Yeah, I was just about to bring that up. This situation isn't unique to Canada. In the United States, they've got a burgeoning, public sector that is in every part of government, which should be interesting when Trump gets inaugurated and we start implementing the Department of Government Efficiency and see how that kind of plays
So
out.
it'll be really interesting experience, right? Like, can they actually cut? And Elon says $2 trillion. I don't think so, but like, I think probably he's going to find hundreds of billions. I actually think he'll find a material amount. I tell everyone it's like Elon's the same guy who promised the Cybertruck in a year and it would cost $30,000, and it cost, it took 7 years and it took 130. Now it's $130,000 to buy a Cybertruck, but it's still a good truck and he actually delivered. So like, I think he's going to find hundreds of billions. I just don't think it's going to be 2 trillion. But it will be interesting. And so what people kind of have to be prepared for is the money supply in Canada has been very, very tight. The population growth has been very, very extreme, and the population who has come, a lot of them are low skilled, and so they came for low skilled jobs, or they came for sorry to say it, but they came for a lot of these kind of diploma mill schooling programs that weren't really they're not going to be designing bridges and operating on people. It's like that's just what we have. So we're going to have a bit of that productivity glut. And I think it might be years before we actually really know our population numbers, because how many people came on student visas or came on work visas and the visa expired and they simply just didn't go home. It's like that's a difficult assignment, I think, to catch and count. And so couple that with the money supply the money supply absolutely exploded in COVID for a couple of years, to historic proportions, where 2020, the growth in Canada's money supply basically was the highest it's ever been in 40 years.
No, didn't it grow like 40% in that time period? It was insane.
That
It
was
was a
the
lot.
That was the U.S.,
Oh, okay.
which affected the whole world. But Canada's was, I believe, just shy of 20%. So it was just shy of 20%, which was the highest we'd ever seen since basically the highest in my lifetime. So the highest, since 1980. So, and really it's like, where does demand come from? People are trying to project these numbers because the governments look at CPI numbers and they look at unemployment numbers. They're setting interest rates, doing planning, but I don't think they look a lot at the money supply. And the money supply is a good prediction of where unemployment rates are going, and it says where inflation is going. And the money supply, despite the massive growth in COVID, 2020, 2021, we start looking at 2022, 2023, 2024, it's been tight of epic proportions. And it's like, where is money? How is money created? Well, the central bank prints the money and buys assets, or commercial banks lend the money. It's been harder and harder to lend the money with interest rates of where they are and the mortgage qualification rules of where they are. And so when you start looking at a constrictive money supply, it's like, that's likely indicative of, if you are a business, is your phone ringing? And are you going to be hiring more people? And conversely, like, if are more people working for higher wages, are they going to bid up the prices of goods and services? It's like, if you look at the money supply, it's a forward-looking indicator. Most of the stuff that we look at it's kind of like looking in the rearview mirror, but that's how they're going to do it. So I would expect bad news. I would expect bad news in the short term, because and I say short term, like anything within a year, that's to me, that's short term. Short term is within a year. Medium term is 1 to 10 years, and long term is 10 years or more. So in the short term, I would expect more bad news, and this is why I've been and so that's the point, is don't get rattled out of your positions like that, because they are going to loosen up on credit, and they're not just loosening up. You adjust interest rates. That's one way you increase the money supply. But the other way is you actually change the requirements to qualify for the loans. Because if you make rates really, really low, but it's extraordinarily hard to qualify for a mortgage, you still don't create any new money, and you still don't increase the demand for goods and services out in the economy. But we are starting to see, like, the rates are falling, which we're seeing, and we're starting to see changes in how, loans get created, which is effectively how money gets created. You saw the extension of the mortgage rules from 25 years to 30 years on CMHC mortgages. And you start to see, they're going to start giving loans in the new year after January 15th for people to build suites in their house, basement suites, backyard suites, up to $2 million, 90% loan to value. That starts increasing the money supply. But the question will remain is, and we'll be revisiting this in the new year, is how quickly does that actually impact the money supply? Because unfortunately, the money supply, most conventional ways of creating money are rather slow. So and they're slow to have an effect. If it gets easier and easier to borrow money at a bank, it's like you usually start to see the effects of that in unemployment rates and CPI prints, like 2 full years after the increase occurs, right? The only shortcut that we've seen where you can kind of circumvent that is direct stimulus. If the government starts printing money and sending it directly to people's accounts, like that can change things in a hurry. But what we experienced during COVID is that's actually very, very difficult to control too. So it's likely to overshoot. So
Yeah,
not
and
a
in
great
reality,
idea.
that's just a wealth transfer. So the big companies get richer, and you essentially get poor because inflation.
Yeah. And so what has to how do you position yourself for this is what has to happen is the money supply has to get easier. That's the only way you're going to bring unemployment rate. That's the only way you're going to bring unemployment rate down. That's the only way. And you start to see even the CPI. We had a 1.6% CPI followed by a 2% CPI. And I tell people it's a difficult number on a month to month, but you start looking at the trends, very, very clear. It's coming down, right? And I wouldn't be surprised at all to see CPI prints in the future less than 2% because of the restriction of the money supply. So what that means is, the remedy for that is to increase the money supply. And what the effect of that is always the appreciation of desirable assets. Like a disproportionate amount of the new money created always goes into desirable assets, because the wealthy people who get a disproportionate amount of that money don't need any more groceries or gas in their cars. Like they're going to go out and they're going to buy, they're going to go buy stocks and real estate, gold and Bitcoin. And that's, kind of how the world works. So the important part is you're seeing these numbers, you have to understand the headline unemployment number is not everything, because it can be propped up with government jobs. And then you can see the underlying weakness. And once you know what the remedy of the underlying weakness is, which is the creation of new money now, and you know what the effect is going to be is asset price inflation. It's just you have to be patient. Everyone wants to time this, and we'd all like to be able to time it. But it's just my opinion that people don't time it. 99.999% of the people don't time it, and there's a lot of billionaires out there who will tell you the exact same thing, that they don't worry about timing the market. And so, do I know how long is it going to take for the government to increase the money supply? I don't know. A year, 2 years, 3 years. Once they start increasing the money supply, depending on how they do it, how long before you see that major asset price inflation? I mean, historically, usually 2 years, but sometimes with direct forms of stimulus, it could happen a little bit quicker, right? But ultimately, it's we know where we are, we know what's going to happen, and ultimately it ends in asset price inflation. And so that's the point to take in that bad information and find find the solution that you can actually kind of profit off the trajectory. So,
all right. I guess that kind of sums up our conversation today. I know you've got meetings coming up in just a few minutes, so we'll just sign off. And if you're looking to build your wealth and build your business, check out our Beat the Odds at Business and Wealth bootcamp that's coming up in May. You can go to the website and click on the bootcamp tab and get your tickets there. Anything else, Josh?
right on. Sounds good, Trevor. We'll see everyone next week.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.